Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell and I'm your host. And today I'm really pleased to welcome Terry Beauchamp. Terry has really published a family memoir that is really focused on your business for many years. And the book that, as a result of that, is Walter Beauchamp, A Tailored History of Toronto. So Terry, we're looking forward to finding out how it came about that you published this book and maybe something about your family and its long legacy in business. So can you just tell me, how did you come about publishing a book?
Well, our family started the business in 1908, which was my grandfather and his partner Alf Howe back in Toronto. And our clients over the years were not just Torontonians. We had clients from all over, but
right.
the company was based in Toronto. So my grandfather, who started the business, ran it for 35 years, and then my father took over from his father, and he ran it coincidentally for 35 years, and then I ended up taking over from my dad, and I ended up running it for approximately 35 years.
Right, so that's the history of your business. So you wanted to document that in some way, and that was how the book came about?
Yes. I thought over the years, the different things that I got to know about our company, I thought was a very interesting story and a good Canadian piece of history. And I thought I wanted to get this documented and written down, not just for myself, but for my kids. And I thought it was an interesting legacy for the business.
Okay. So this is Toronto. You know, there was an era when everyone wore a three-piece suit and sort of dressed for the occasion. How did your family cater to that?
Well, back in the day, obviously at the beginning of the business back in 1908, there was only one way to get a garment made, and everybody had to get them custom tailored. There weren't things off the rack.
Right.
And back in those days, people did wear 2- and 3-piece suits.
Right.
So when my grandfather started, he did a combination of both business suits, and he started at the beginning of the company's existence to make military uniforms and uniforms for police and for railway companies and that type of thing. So we did uniforms plus civilian suits.
Right. And when you're talking about uniforms, we're not just talking about ordinary uniforms. Some of them are their dress regalia and so forth. So there was a lot of work and effort that went into designing and producing those.
Well, correct. And we did both Army, Navy, and Air Force. Right. And going back to the First World War, and each regiment and you would have their own pattern, and then within each regiment you'd have various rankings, and you had there was a lot of detail work.
Right. And
we continue to this day to do that.
Okay. So we're talking about a Toronto-based story here, but really a trans-Canada story, because it's
Totally.
all about you know, the history of your company and supplying you know, people across Canada, coast to coast. So what's the Kootenay Connection?
Well, the Kootenay Connections, quite interesting. Our family, we have, my wife Helen and I have 3 sons, and who all were born and grew up in Toronto, and then each one of them now, they're in their mid-30s, and once they finished university, one after another ended up coming out west. They always loved the West, and they were always outdoor people, and they ended up 15 years ago, one came to Nelson, and then within a year or so, the other 2 came. And so now all our sons, by coincidence, live in Nelson.
Right.
And it made it a lot easier when Helen and I retired in Toronto. You know, you could have had one son in Halifax and one in Vancouver and one in Montreal. Well, they were all 3 of them were here, and we were coming out to visit like 2 or 3 times a year. We'd come and stay at the Hume Hotel.
Right.
And we said once we got stuck one Christmas in a snowstorm, we said maybe we should just get a place and move here. Mm-hmm. So we did that. We moved to Nelson in 2017, and that's our home now.
Well, welcome to the Kootenays. It's
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
We love it.
So let's talk about the story of the company and a little bit. A lot of colorful stories packed in between the covers of that book that you've produced. What were some of the ones that stood out in your mind over the years?
Well, there are many of them, but one in particular that's in the book is a gentleman came in one day who I did not recognize in the store and asked if we could help, and he needed a button on a jacket replaced, and I replaced it, and we got chatting, and it turned out that he had come to Toronto with his wife, who was having some medical issue that she was having treated. And it turned out that this gentleman, who was a retired American entrepreneur who lived in Africa, he lived in Kenya, and he had the largest privately owned ranch in all of Africa, and he raised beef cattle for the Middle East.
Oh, okay.
But he and his wife set up a rhinoceros wildlife refuge, and he and his wife, and this was in the 50s, started this ranch to help preserve the rhinoceros.
Wow.
And anyways, I ended up making clothing, meeting him from having popped into our store this one day to have a button sewn on, but for years I used to get calls from him from Nairobi, Kenya, and
Right.
we'd make him sports jackets and slacks and send them over to Africa.
So you must have seen a whole raft of interesting customers, quasi-celebrities and so forth. But I did notice in the beginning of your book that Gordon Lightfoot actually wrote the introduction. What's the story behind that?
Well, Gord's a good friend, and over the years we got to making clothes for him, both for his personal use and also for him to perform in. And he's quite a wonderful character. And when the book, I'd finished writing it, I thought, I think I'm going to ask Gord if he'd write the foreword for the book. And I called him up and I said, I'd like to ask a favor. I said, would you consider writing my foreword? And we got together and had a coffee. And when I asked him, he said, well, I've never done one before. And I said, well, you've written all these great ballads and poetry. I said, I don't think it should be that hard. And he told me initially, he says, I got to think about it. So I know how he is, and I left it with him, and he said, I'll get back to you. And so the publisher wanted to know right away whether he'd agreed to do it. And I said, well, he's thinking about it. And it ultimately took him 6 weeks to make his mind up. And he finally called me to tell me, he said, I've thought about it, Terry. And he said, I think I'd like to write it for you.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, it really sets up the book really nicely. And so he was a long-term customer of the store.
Yes.
So where was the store located? Right downtown Toronto?
Yes, and the store had many different locations. I myself, I remember as a child going to the store we had on King Street, King and Bay Street, and then we had a store on, and that would have been in the 50s. And I remember we had a store 30 years onward from there up on Adelaide Street, Adelaide and Yonge, and that's where I started my career working in the store with my dad. And I worked with my dad for 25 years, which was wonderful.
So reading through the book, it would appear to me that there was a point in time where, people weren't dressing up like they did before. They didn't wear and then a TV show came along that sort of rekindled the interest in sort of classic dress. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, you're speaking of Mad Men, which, yes, back early on, everybody seemed to wear the same thing, and then the dress down code came in, and some people would wear jeans and slacks and that type of thing, but there were still some people in need of custom tailoring and business suits. And one of the things I've prided myself with the company is that over the years, for over 100 years, we've been able to see what the need is, because it's not always been the same thing.
Right.
It's changed and modified over the years.
Right.
So
anticipating those trends and so forth?
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the keys to the business lasting so long?
Totally. I mean, we've been able to make all those things.
Right.
Casual right through to the ultra formal. I mean, we've
Right.
done dress, tuxedos, tails, that type of thing.
Right.
I mean, we've had formal wear that's been worn at Buckingham Palace.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Interesting. So I'm just going to ask about the actual process. When someone came in for a tailored suit, where would you start? What would be the starting point?
Well, you'd usually find out from them what it was they had in mind in terms of what they were looking for. But you'd get a sense whether they wanted to have something made. We did carry off the rack garments also in the latter years, but what we really were well known for was our custom tailoring.
Right.
And I remember one time we had a fellow who was the original editor with the Toronto Sun newspaper, and his name was Colonel Ed Dunlop. He was a retired Army officer who'd been blinded in the war, and I remember he used to come in with Mrs. Dunlop with my father, and I would watch my dad sell this man who was blind custom tailored suits, and they would talk color, and he would say, well, Walter, I want a suit that a quarter-inch chalk stripe, and my dad would get them out. He couldn't see them, but my dad would actually explain to him verbally what he was looking at, and he'd go, well, no, I don't want something quite that blue. And I always thought it was really fascinating to see this type of thing happen in our store.
Right.
You know?
So what is the demand for custom tailoring these days?
I would say it's very different from what it used to be, but overall, I don't think, like in Nelson where we live now, people don't wear custom tailored suits. You know, they wear ski gear and you know, hiking outfits and stuff. So it doesn't make sense. But still, I think in the bigger cities where you've got, you know, certain types of businesses, there's still demand for that.
Right. Right.
You know?
So I remember reading in the book as well that someone would come in and they felt they had as close a relationship with their tailor as they did with anyone else, and it was very important, that one-on-one relationship.
Yes, and I'm very proud of that, and I feel very fortunate that there's many people who became friends and they were clients, but we have first, second, third, fourth generation. I think we have the odd fifth generation people who still shop with our company, and we have, you know, some families that go back, you know, to the 20s.
Right.
You know?
So let's just talk about the production of the book, the writing of the book, and so forth. So you worked with a journalist, and
I did. I
put that all together. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I'd sort of had this thought in my mind for probably 10 years to write. I thought, you know, at one point down the road, I want to write a book. I've got enough information, I think, that would be interesting, and I wanted to get it, you know, spelled out, so hopefully for my kids, which I've done now. But when I did finally get to a point where I retired, I had a friend, Pedro Mendez, who was a journalist with the CBC, who I had asked if he would help me write the book. So the two of us collaborated, and it took us about 2 years to get the whole thing down.
Right.
And I'm quite pleased with what.
Well, I have to say, your book gives me a really good feel as to what your store was all about. I've never walked through the door of the store, but I get a real sense of the quality. And
it was like a club. People would come in there and feel very, very at home, and they knew everybody, and we knew. Like it was odd sometimes. Like, the odd time somebody would come in who we didn't know, but they were made to feel welcome. Also.
The other thing that fascinated me as I just went through page by page, and there was an era where, you know, your advertising for the store had great personality, and you told me before that it was something that people look forward to.
Well, they did. They loved getting them. There was a sense of humor to all our advertising that people. It wasn't sort of stodgy, you know, type advertising. There was always some fun in what we did, and it was. We used to send quarterly postcards and cards out to our clients. And we would always come up with some sort of a fun way of getting the message across. And what we were really trying to do is just let them know, if and when you need some tailored clothing, we're here for you.
Right. So it had a creative approach to it. There's no question about it. I think there was even one take on your name. It was
yes. Yeah. Well, there's always been a discussion on how you pronounce Beauchamp, and actually more people pronounce it Beauchamp than Beauchamp.
Right.
But we had a fun advertising piece once where we had a contest, and we there was like 10 different ways you could pronounce the name.
Right.
And whoever had their name finally picked with the correct pronunciation won a custom tailored suit.
Right. So again, a lot of personality, a lot of fun was put into your promotion and advertising. So we're just going to wrap up, but before we do that, tell me, what was your favorite story that is encapsulated in the book?
Well, it's interesting. I would tell you, favorite isn't always. There's one important piece that there's a chapter in that is about a young lady who was with our armed forces, who unfortunately lost her life in Afghanistan, and we had to unfortunately change her rank. She was promoted when she was the highest ranking officer at the time she died in Afghanistan, and she suffered from PTS. Mm-hmm. And I decided to include that in the book because it's becoming more accepted as a mental illness, and initially I wasn't going to include that in the book. Mm-hmm. It sounds like a bit of a downer, but I think that's a very important part of the book.
Right. Terry, again, I'm just going to highlight the book. So, A Tailored History of Toronto, Walter Beauchamp. So, the history of the company. Thank you, Terry, for being our guest and giving us an insight into the fascinating history of your family and business. And again, welcome to the Kootenays.
Thank you very much, Keith. Thanks.
This is Talking Kootenay Books, and my name is Keith Powell. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell, and I'm the host. We have the opportunity of talking to local authors and writers throughout the Kootenays. Today, I'm pleased to have Fraser Sinclair here as our guest today. Welcome, Fraser. Great to have you on the show.
Great to be here, Keith. Thank you.
So, Fraser, tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from?
Well, I'm from Grassmere, which is down by the Montana border. Born and raised here in born here in Cranbrook, raised out there on the family farm.
Okay. So Sinclair is a well-known name in history when it comes to the Kootenays. Can you just tell me a little bit about some of your family history?
Well, my great-great-grandfather was the one of the first people to come into this area down through what is now known as Sinclair Pass up by Radium.
Okay.
That was James Sinclair. He brought cattle through the area. He led a party of, I believe it was about 20 families that were with him.
Right.
And they were headed to settle in what was then known as Oregon country.
Right.
There was no international border at that time.
Right. Yeah, interesting overland experience back in the day. So I wanted to just explore the two new books that you've put out. First of all, the first one was Sawtooth, and then the second was a sequel to that, The Lone Dark Figure. How close together were these books put out?
They were pretty close. I published Sawtooth in March of 2019. And I published The Lone Dark Figure in January of this year.
Okay, so 2 books in 1 year, that's a pretty big accomplishment. Congratulations. Tell me, how would you describe the books?
Well, the books are, the original one, Sawtooth, it starts out with it's 2 couples that take on a winter lodge caretaking job high up in the BC mountains.
Right.
And it goes from there. It's all their adventures and misfortunes, and dealing with the eccentric owner of the lodge.
Right.
And then that book, the Sawtooth book, was actually, I didn't know at that point if I could put out a story.
Right.
So I just started writing, and it just compounded, and it just went. By the time I finished Sawtooth, I knew exactly what the sequel was going to be about.
So you were sort of writing the second book as you were working on the first.
I was, yeah.
Okay. So I read through both books. I found them quite colorful, full of adventure, full of sort of suspense and that kind of thing. What prompted you to actually sit down and write the books?
Well, the story, the original Sawtooth story, I've had in my mind for probably 10 years, roughly what I wanted to write about.
Right.
And my wife and I, we managed a lodge, the Elkview Lodge in Fernie. We did that for 2 years. And when we got that job, and there we were actually living part of my book. We're managing this lodge. It's high up in the mountains. It's snow up to the yin-yang. I mean,
Right.
there was all kinds of snow up there. And we had to
Right.
deal with all this, these people coming in, checking out. So all of a sudden, I thought, you know, the story's coming together.
Right.
I
So
can
you
write the book.
you could take a lot of those personal experiences and
Yeah.
sort of incorporate it into a novel? Is that really what happened?
And that's basically what I did. And actually, I think I did it a little more in the second book.
Okay.
I put a lot more of maybe my own personal experiences with things added to them
Right.
into the second book.
So your father was Roy Sinclair, is that correct?
That's correct.
So he was also a writer.
Yeah.
Did that inspire you in any way?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I loved my dad's books, and I thought, you know, I wonder if I can do this. So that's kind of where it came from.
Right. So let's talk about the publishing process. How did you go about actually taking, the task of writing it down and then producing a book? How did that all go together?
Well, I ended up talking to my sister up in the Yukon, and she had a friend there that self-publishes. And so I got a hold of her and talked to her for a bit about it, and it ended up being she self-published through a company in Edmonton. So I used that company and put the first book out, got a hold of them for the second book, and away it went.
Right. So why will people enjoy your book?
Well, I think especially people that know me, they will realize that a lot of it is maybe a little bit about me, but yet they might be in it too.
Right.
There might be a little bit of them in it as well.
Right. So there's a lot of Kootenay connections in the book and so forth. So that comes out quite strongly throughout the book. So when you actually went to the printer, and did they do all the design and actually putting the book together and the editing and that kind of thing?
No, the editing I had, my older sister did the original edit on both books. And then I did my covers. The cover of Sawtooth is my own picture.
Okay.
I took that right off my deck in Grassmere looking into Sand Creek behind Elko.
Right.
And then the second cover, I did all the designing on that myself. And once I had the lone dark figure that was going to be
Right.
a pretty main character,
Right.
I wanted to go with that for a cover.
Sure. So when you actually put the book together and so forth, any mentors or any inspiration as to how you came about the characters, developed the story, that kind of thing?
I suppose my mentor would be my father.
Yeah.
You know, just going back to that.
So our viewers may not be familiar with what your father wrote. Could you just tell us a little bit about his books?
Yeah, he wrote 3 books. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me because I know the names of 2 of them, Paper Trees and Whiskey 6,
Right.
and I can't recall the name of the
So just
third
give me an
one.
idea what the books were about.
Well, they were back in the olden days, very, very early days. The one is based down in the Grassmere area,
Right.
and it was probably in the 20s, 30s. And then one of the other books is more up in the McBride, Penny, BC area,
Okay.
and which he lived there too.
Right. A lot of logging history and that
A lot
kind
of
of thing.
logging history, yeah.
Right. Okay. So when you actually have the book in your hand, Have you been out promoting it, getting some reaction from readers, that kind of thing?
I have. I do a lot of social media promoting, Facebook, Instagram, and I do have them here at Huckleberry Books in Cranbrook.
Oh, okay.
And any feedback I'm getting has been really good.
Yeah.
People are really enjoying the story.
Right.
In fact, I had an old timer out in the Elko area tell me the only thing wrong with my books is there wasn't enough of them.
So you'd like to keep on reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wants me to do more.
So which takes me to the next question. What is the plan for the future, Fraser?
Well, I am going to write more. I wouldn't mind doing one more in this series and then go in a different direction.
Right.
I've actually had I worked at the Ministry of Highways in Jaffrey for 22 years, and I've actually had some of my old co-workers ask me to do a book on that.
Oh, okay.
And then I had another old timer at Elko ask me if I would do a book on some of the old sawmills in the area,
Right.
and I do find that quite interesting.
So those would be historical.
Yeah, those would be more along a historical line.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that something that you're interested in, the local history of the area?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think your own family's got a pretty interesting story.
Well,
Have you ever thought about writing about your family?
Yes, and my brother is, he's bugging me to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that might be a possibility down the road.
Could be a possibility down the road. The way it's looking, I'm going to be awful busy writing all these stories that everybody else wants.
So just before we wrap up here, just tell me how you go about writing. How often do you write? What's the process?
Well, I use a writing app. I probably spend, I'll write from September right through till January, February, and I probably spend maybe 2 to 3 hours per day on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And every day or whenever you sort of...
Not every day. Yes, you get on pretty good runs where you do go every day. Once Christmas hits, I find I just take a break. I shut down for a while. Maybe get back at it in the new year. Whatnot like that. My wife has been very supportive. She's always encouraging me on because she wants to read the next chapter.
Right. So I noticed in the books that there's a connection to Arizona. What's the connection there?
The connection to Arizona is my wife. She's from Phoenix.
Okay.
And we spent some time down there. I spent a lot of time in the area that I do mention in there, Congress and that country. It's a very good, a lot of gold in that country.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you do some gold prospecting, right?
Yep. Yeah, I do some of my own. I have a hobby claim.
Yeah.
Just out of Cranbrook here.
Good. Well, congratulations again on the book. So the two books, Sawtooth and The Lone Dark Figure, Fraser Sinclair, an interesting read, and thanks for sharing with our viewers. I think people would enjoy reading your adventure stories.
Well, thank you, Keith.
Good. My name is Keith Powell, and this has been Talking Kootenay Books.